Most people think productivity means progress. If the days are full, the inbox is clear, and nothing is falling apart. It feels like things are working. But there's a strange pattern many people never notice until years have passed. You stay busy. You stay reliable. You solve problems. And somehow, the important things never quite move. Nothing goes wrong. Nothing collapses. Nothing forces a change. Which is exactly why it's so hard to see what's actually happening. This video isn't about laziness, failure, or bad habits. It's about a quiet pattern where effort stays high, and progress slowly stops reacting. Once you recognize it, you'll understand why so many capable, disciplined people feel stuck without ever making a mistake. You wake up on time. You check your phone before your feet touch the floor. A few emails, a message you meant to answer yesterday, a notification about something you said you'd handle this week. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just small things waiting. You get up, coffee, shower, the usual sequence. By the time the day properly starts, you've already responded to 3 people and postponed one thing that would take real focus. At work, you stay busy. You answer quickly. You fix small problems before they grow. You show up to meetings prepared. You keep things moving. If someone needs help, you step in. If something breaks, you patch it. From the outside, it looks solid, responsible, reliable. And in a way, it is. The hours fill up. You move from task to task without much resistance. You don't waste time. You don't drift. You don't complain. If anything, you're the steady one, the person others can count on. By late afternoon, you've handled dozens of small decisions. You've cleared your inbox twice. You've avoided one uncomfortable call. You told yourself you'd do it tomorrow, when you have more energy, when it feels cleaner, more controlled. Nothing is falling apart. Your income is steady. Your calendar is full. You're not behind. You're not in crisis. If someone asked how things are going, you'd probably say, busy, good, just a lot going on. And that would be true. But there's a quiet detail that doesn't announce itself. At the end of the day, when you close your laptop, there's no real shift, no sense that something moved forward in a meaningful way. You worked hard, you stayed engaged, you did what was expected. Yet the bigger things, the ones you once said mattered, remain untouched, not ignored, just slightly postponed, adjusted, rescheduled. Tomorrow, you tell yourself, you'll create space for them. You drive home the same way. You think about what still needs to be done. You mentally rehearse how you'll approach it differently next time. The plan feels reasonable, thought out, under control. And here's the part that makes it difficult to notice. Nothing about this feels wrong. You're not lazy. You're not reckless. You're not making obvious mistakes. In fact, you're doing exactly what responsible adults are supposed to do. Staying busy, solving problems, keeping things stable. Which is why the pattern hides so well. Because when effort looks consistent and life looks stable, it's hard to question the direction. There's no alarm, no visible loss, no sudden drop. Just days that resemble each other. Productive, full, controlled. And if this continues for a year, it won't feel dramatic. It will feel normal. That's what makes it easy to miss. The next morning looks almost the same. You open your laptop with a clear intention. Today, you'll start that larger project, the one that actually changes something. the one that doesn't just maintain the current pace, but shifts it. Before you begin, you scan your inbox just quickly. There are 5 new messages. 2 are simple. 1 requires a short explanation. 1 invites you to a meeting later this week. The last one is vague, but it feels important enough to acknowledge. You tell yourself it will only take a few minutes. An hour passes. You handled everything well. You clarified expectations. You prevented confusion. You kept your reputation intact. If someone were observing, they'd call it professionalism. And it is. But the larger task, the one that requires uninterrupted focus, now feels heavier. Starting it no longer feels clean. It feels delayed. So you adjust. You decide to outline it instead of fully starting. That way, you're still moving forward. It's practical, sensible, no risk involved. You're not avoiding it, you're preparing for it. That's how it usually begins. Small delays that feel responsible. You push certain conversations to next week because timing matters. You postpone a bold decision because more information would help. You keep refining instead of launching. You stay available instead of unavailable. None of these choices are dramatic. They're measured, calm, thought through. And because they are reasonable, they don't trigger concern. By the afternoon, your calendar fills itself again. Quick calls, minor adjustments, status updates. You're useful. You're visible. You're dependable. The bigger move, the one that could change your trajectory, waits quietly in the background. Not rejected, just slightly out of reach. If you looked at the week from a distance, it would seem productive. Tasks completed, issues resolved, no fires left burning. You're maintaining momentum. But maintenance and movement are not the same thing. And this is subtle, because maintenance feels active, it consumes time, it requires effort, it even creates mild stress. You finish the day tired, which makes it easy to assume progress happened. Yet some part of you notices that the results aren't expanding. They're steady, stable, contained. There's no collapse, but there's no lift either. Effort continues. Days stay full. Income staying flat doesn't feel alarming when life still functions. It just blends into the background. What makes this harder to detect is that the delays always have logic behind them. They protect your schedule. They protect your image. They protect your current level of comfort. And protection feels wise. You tell yourself you're being strategic. You're waiting for the right moment. You're building capacity first. Maybe you are. But something interesting is happening beneath the surface. Something that doesn't announce itself right away. The more you prioritize what's urgent and visible, the less room remains for what's transformative but quiet. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like responsibility. And that's exactly why it continues. There's something reassuring about being the reliable one. When your phone lights up, you answer. When someone needs input, you provide it. When a decision stalls, you step in and move it forward. You've built a rhythm around responsiveness. People expect you to be available, and you are. There's a quiet satisfaction in that. Not dramatic pride, just the steady confirmation that you matter in the flow of things. Your presence smooths friction. Your attention prevents delays. Your involvement keeps systems running. It feels useful. Over time, your day organizes itself around that usefulness. You don't even have to think about it anymore. The small interruptions, the questions, the follow-ups, the clarifications, become the structure of your schedule. You tell yourself you're adaptable, and you are. But adaptability has a side effect. When you're always ready to respond, you rarely initiate something that disrupts the current balance. You don't block off 3 uninterrupted hours unless it feels safe to do so. You don't disappear from availability unless there's a strong reason. So you stay accessible. It's subtle. No one demands it directly. No rule says you can't shift your focus. Yet there's an invisible agreement forming. You will maintain the pace. You will keep the machine steady. And the machine appreciates you for it. The interesting part is this: being needed creates clarity. There's always something to do. Always someone to answer. Always a defined next step. You never sit in uncertainty for long. Big shifts, on the other hand, require silence, space, temporary invisibility. They require you to stop responding and start building. That kind of space feels different, less immediately rewarding, less externally validated. So the day continues as usual. You solve what's in front of you. You close loops that others open. You protect timelines. You maintain relationships. You keep momentum steady. And because everything continues to function, there's no pressure to change the pattern. Working hard without progress doesn't feel like stagnation when you're constantly in motion. It just feels like responsibility. By the end of the week, you've handled dozens of requests. You've kept everything stable. No complaints. No missed expectations. But the larger trajectory hasn't shifted. If someone asked whether you're growing, you'd hesitate. Not because things are bad, but because they're controlled, predictable, measured. There's comfort in that predictability. Comfort can quietly shape decisions without announcing itself. You don't avoid risk out of fear. You avoid it because stability already works. It pays the bills. It preserves your role. It keeps your identity intact. And over time, that comfort becomes the standard you protect. Nothing breaks. Nothing accelerates either. The pattern is still hard to see clearly. It feels like maturity, like discipline, like staying grounded. But there's a quiet trade happening in the background, and it doesn't demand attention yet. At first, you don't notice it. You increase your effort slightly. You answer faster. You stay later one evening. You prepare more thoroughly than usual. You tighten the details. You remove small inefficiencies. You expect something to shift. Not dramatically, just proportionally. More effort, slightly more response. That's how it used to work. But lately, the response feels muted. You send the extra email. No change. You volunteer for the additional task. Appreciation, but no real movement. You refine the proposal. It gets approved and absorbed into the same steady pace. Nothing declines. Nothing expands. Results no longer react the way they once did. And because there's no visible loss, you assume it's temporary. Maybe timing. Maybe the market. Maybe the season. You adjust again. You optimize. You stay patient. Patience feels responsible. So you keep the rhythm steady. You tell yourself consistency compounds. You remind yourself that showing up daily matters more than dramatic moves. You've seen enough to know that shortcuts don't last. All true. But something subtle has changed. Earlier in your career, small risks created noticeable shifts. A new conversation led somewhere unexpected. A bold idea changed your position slightly. Even minor initiatives created momentum. Now, similar effort produces maintenance. The machine runs, it doesn't expand. You start to normalize it. Stable is good. Predictable is safe. No sudden drops, no volatility. If someone asked whether things are working, you'd still say yes. Because they are. It's just that the curve has flattened. And flat doesn't feel alarming when life is functioning. It feels manageable, controlled. You can plan around it. Financially stuck doesn't look dramatic when your income covers your lifestyle. It looks organized, balanced, mature. The difficulty is that plateauing rarely announces itself with urgency. It shows up as repetition. Weeks resemble each other. The effort is real. The output is clean. The feedback is neutral. You start to compensate quietly. If results don't respond to extra effort, you increase effort further. You double down on reliability. You make sure nothing slips. It feels like the correct move. After all, discipline built what you have now. But there's a faint tension in this approach. One you don't fully name. Because if results aren't responding the way they used to, increasing effort may not be addressing the real shift. Still, nothing is broken, which makes it easy to continue. And the longer this pattern runs without obvious failure, the more permanent it begins to feel. By now, the routine feels stable enough to trust. You know what your weeks look like. You know how long tasks take. You know how to recover when something small goes wrong. There's very little chaos, very few surprises. From the outside, this is what maturity looks like. You don't chase every new idea. You don't make impulsive moves. You don't disrupt systems that are functioning. You maintain. Maintenance becomes your specialty. And over time, that specialty shapes your identity. People describe you as consistent, grounded, safe to work with. You don't overpromise. You don't disappear. You keep the pace realistic. All of that builds credibility. But credibility has gravity. The more you are trusted to maintain stability, the less often you are seen as someone who shifts direction. Invitations begin to match your pattern. You're brought into conversations to preserve, not to reinvent. It happens slowly. No one announces it. There's no meeting where your role is officially defined as keeper of continuity. It just becomes implied. You start receiving tasks that align with what you've proven. You're given responsibilities that protect existing structures. You're looped into projects after the bold decisions are already made, to execute cleanly, to stabilize outcomes. And you do it well, very well. The cost isn't immediate, it shows up in small ways. You hesitate before proposing something that might disrupt the flow. You think twice about blocking off time for exploration when others depend on your availability. You calculate the risk of stepping back from responsiveness, even temporarily. Years can move like this, busy, useful, trusted. Momentum doesn't disappear, it just narrows. Results no longer responding feels manageable at first. You adjust expectations slightly. You tell yourself, growth has seasons. You remind yourself that not every year is expansion. Reasonable thoughts? But there's a quiet exchange happening. In protecting what works, you slowly reduce exposure to what could change it. The time you invest in maintenance compounds, but in a different direction than you expected. It compounds toward predictability, and predictability feels good in the short term. It lowers stress. It keeps relationships smooth. It protects income staying flat from becoming income declining. But here's the subtle reactivation point most people miss. 5 steady years can pass faster than one unstable one. Not because they're chaotic, but because they require less re-evaluation. When everything functions, you don't pause to question direction. You just continue. And continuation, over time, hardens into structure. Still, nothing looks broken. That's what makes the cost so quiet. At some point you begin to sense it more clearly. Not as frustration, not as regret, just as a pattern. You put in effort, measured, disciplined effort, and the response from the outside world feels proportional only up to a certain point. After that, it levels off. It's subtle. You improve a process. Things stay smooth. You take on more responsibility. Your role stays stable. You work longer hours for a season. The overall trajectory barely shifts. The system you helped maintain has adapted to you. It knows what to expect. It absorbs your reliability. It factors in your consistency. It doesn't resist you, but it also doesn't amplify you. This is where the pattern becomes visible. Stability over time reduces responsiveness. When everything is predictable, there's less friction, less volatility, less dramatic feedback. And while that sounds ideal, it also means fewer sharp inflection points. Earlier, small risks created disproportionate returns because the structure around you was still flexible. Now, the structure is firm. It runs smoothly. It doesn't need dramatic correction. So, your additional effort blends in. Working hard without progress no longer feels confusing. It feels logical within this environment. The machine is optimized for steadiness, not acceleration. And you helped build that steadiness. There's no villain in this story. No external force holding you back. No dramatic mistake you can point to. Just continuity. Continuity that became comfort. Comfort that became identity. Identity that shaped decisions. Decisions that reinforced stability. And stability, over time, dampened reaction. You didn't lose ambition. You didn't stop caring. You didn't become passive. You became consistent. Consistency created trust. Trust created responsibility. Responsibility reduced flexibility. Reduced flexibility limited exposure to momentum. It didn't happen in a single year. It accumulated. If you zoom out far enough, you can see the arc. Effort that once produced visible shift now produces maintenance. Maintenance protects what exists. Protection reduces experimentation. Reduced experimentation slows acceleration. Nothing collapsed. That's the key. Because collapse would have forced a response. It would have interrupted the pattern. It would have demanded reinvention. Instead, everything worked. And when everything works, you rarely question the structure. But now the connection is clearer. The plateau wasn't random. It was built slowly, responsibly, intelligently, through repetition of choices that prioritized stability over responsiveness. And that realization doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet, almost obvious once you see it. Looking back, there was never a single moment where things went wrong. No dramatic failure, no public setback, no sudden loss that forced you to rebuild. The pattern wasn't created by collapse. It was created by success. Repeated, stable, controlled success. You worked hard. That effort turned into routine. The routine created stability. Stability reduced volatility. Reduced volatility lowered responsiveness. And over time, results stopped reacting the way they once did. Not because you declined, but because the environment around you adjusted to your consistency. You became predictable in the best possible way. Reliable, dependable, safe. And safe systems don't produce sharp movement. They produce continuity. Effort that once stretched you now reinforces you. Energy that once expanded your trajectory now preserves it. The very behaviors that built your position now maintain it. There's no contradiction in that. It's structural. When you're early in a phase, responsiveness is high. Small changes create visible shifts because the structure is still flexible. As the structure strengthens, it absorbs variation. It smooths spikes. It protects what's already functioning. So you kept doing what worked. You stayed busy. You responded quickly. You protected relationships. You avoided unnecessary risk. You maintained quality. You remained available. And each of those choices made sense. That's why the pattern was never obvious. Nothing felt irresponsible. Nothing felt careless. You weren't drifting. You were disciplined. But discipline applied to preservation produces a different outcome than discipline applied to expansion. Over enough time, the difference becomes visible. Results no longer responding isn't a mystery when you understand the sequence. Effort turned into habit. Habit turned into stability. Stability reduced sensitivity to additional effort. The system didn't reject you. It calibrated around you. And calibration creates equilibrium. Equilibrium feels calm, manageable, adult. It just doesn't feel like lift. There's no urgency in recognizing this. No dramatic conclusion. No instruction attached to it. Just clarity. The pattern was never broken. It was functioning exactly as built. And for a long time, functioning was enough.